Millionaire catches housekeeper with her daughter hiding scared under the bed. What happened next changed everything. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The towering limestone mansion on West 86th Street stood like a fortress against the crisp October afternoon, its Georgian facade reflecting the amber light that filtered through the skeletal branches of Central Park's oak trees. Marcus Wellington III adjusted his Italian leather briefcase as he climbed the front steps, his Armani suit wrinkled from the unexpected early return from his Chicago acquisition meeting. The deal had fallen through, another company's betrayal that reminded him why trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. At 38, Marcus had built Wellington Enterprises into a real estate empire worth over $200 million, but success had come at a price. His steel-grey eyes, once warm in his youth, now carried the calculated coldness of a man who had learned that sentiment was weakness. His 6-foot frame moved with the precision of someone who controlled every aspect of his environment, from the temperature of his penthouse office to the exact thread count of his Egyptian cotton sheets. The mansion's interior welcomed him with familiar silence. 23 rooms of museum-quality furniture and priceless art collections created an atmosphere of refined isolation. The marble floors of the foyer reflected his footsteps as he made his way toward the sweeping staircase, mahogany banisters polished to perfection. Everything was exactly as he preferred it, controlled, pristine, and empty of the messy complications that came with human connection. He had fired his previous housekeeper 6 months ago for the unforgivable sin of moving his papers while dusting. The new one, Rosa Hernandez, had been a godsend, efficient, invisible, and blissfully silent. She cleaned around him like a ghost, never attempting small talk or offering opinions about his life. It was the perfect professional relationship, exactly what he demanded from all his employees. As Marcus reached the second-floor landing, something stopped him cold. A sound, barely audible but distinctly human, drifted from the direction of his master bedroom. His heart rate quickened, corporate composure cracking as primal alertness took over. In a city where home invasions weren't uncommon, even in the Upper West Side, he had learned to trust his instincts. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar, unusual since Rosa always left it precisely closed after cleaning. Marcus approached with the stealth of a man who had grown up in Detroit's rougher neighborhoods before money had buffed away the edges of his past. The whispered voices grew clearer, one adult, one unmistakably young. "Shh, Mia, he won't find us here. Just a little longer, okay?" The voice belonged to Rosa, but it carried a tremor of fear that Marcus had never heard before. His hand trembled slightly as he pushed the bedroom door open, revealing the expansive space with its king-sized bed draped in midnight blue silk and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park. Nothing seemed disturbed, but the whispers continued. Marcus dropped to his knees beside the bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. What he saw beneath the custom mahogany frame would haunt him forever. Rosa Hernandez, the woman who cleaned his home with such meticulous care, was curled in a protective ball around a small girl who couldn't be more than 8 years old. Both were trembling, Rosa's usually pristine uniform wrinkled and stained with tears. The child's dark eyes, wide with terror, met his for a split second before she buried her face deeper into Rosa's shoulder. She was beautiful in the way children are before the world breaks them, with Rosa's same olive complexion and thick black hair tied back in a ponytail with a frayed pink ribbon. Her clothes were clean, but obviously second-hand, and she clutched a worn, stuffed elephant as if it were her lifeline. "Mr. Wellington!" Rosa gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, I can explain." "Get out from under there," Marcus said, his voice coming out harsher than intended. Years of corporate negotiations had taught him to mask uncertainty with authority. But seeing the way both females flinched at his tone sent an unexpected stab of guilt through his chest. Rosa crawled out first. her movements careful and protective, never letting go of the child who clung to her like a barnacle. As they stood before him in his bedroom, this sanctuary of isolation, Marcus noticed details he had somehow missed in 6 months of employment. Rosa's left wrist bore the faded yellow remnants of an old bruise. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, suggesting sleep was a luxury she rarely enjoyed. Her hands, which he had only ever seen wielding cleaning supplies, shook as they smoothed the girl's hair. "This is my daughter Sophia," Rosa said, her accent thicker than usual under stress. "Mr. Wellington, please, I know this looks bad, but—" "Your daughter," Marcus interrupted, his mind racing. In all the background checks and interviews, there had been no mention of a child. "You told me you had no family in New York." The girl, Sophia, peeked out from behind Rosa's protective embrace, and Marcus caught sight of a purple bruise on her upper arm, partially hidden by her long-sleeved shirt. The sight hit him like a physical blow, dragging up memories he had spent years burying. He remembered being 8 years old himself, hiding in closets while his father's drunken rage shook their tiny apartment in Detroit. "I lied," Rosa admitted, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But I had to. You said you didn't want complications, and I needed this job so desperately. Sophia's father, my ex-husband, he found out where I work. He's been calling, making threats. We have nowhere else to go." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of Sunday afternoon traffic, filtering through the bulletproof windows Marcus had installed after his last business partner had threatened his life. He studied the woman who had cleaned his home for half a year, seeing her clearly for the first time. Rosa Hernandez wasn't just an employee. She was a mother fleeing from something terrible, brave enough to lie to a powerful man to protect her child. "How long have you been hiding her here?" Marcus asked, his voice softer now. "Just today," Rosa replied quickly. "He showed up at our apartment this morning. He was drunk, screaming about how I embarrassed him by leaving. Sophia was so scared and I didn't know what else to do. I brought her here because I thought you wouldn't be back until tomorrow." Marcus looked at Sophia again, noting how she watched him with the wariness of a wild animal ready to bolt. Her silence spoke volumes. Children who had seen too much violence often retreated into themselves as a survival mechanism. He recognized the look because he had worn it himself decades ago. The lavender scent of the fabric softener Rosa used on his linens mingled with something else, the sharp metallic smell of fear-induced sweat. It was a scent he remembered from his own childhood, from nights when he and his sister had hidden in their bedroom while their parents' marriage exploded in the living room below. "Mr. Wellington," Rosa continued, desperation creeping into her voice. "I know I shouldn't have brought her here, but he was so angry. When Sophia tried to stop him from hitting me, he pushed her down. She's just a baby. She doesn't understand why her father hurts people who love him." Something inside Marcus's chest cracked at those words. The little girl's story was painting itself in vivid, painful detail without her having to speak a single word. This was a child who had learned that love and violence often came from the same hands, who had discovered that the people meant to protect you were sometimes the ones you needed protection from. As the October sun began to set, casting long shadows across his bedroom floor, Marcus Wellington III found himself at a crossroads he had never anticipated. The safe, controlled world he had built was being invaded by two people who represented everything he had spent his adult life avoiding: emotional complications, unpredictable variables, and the messy reality of human need. But as he looked at Sophia's face, still partially hidden behind her mother's protective arm, something stirred in the place where his heart used to be before business had frozen it solid. Maybe it was recognition of his own childhood pain, or maybe it was simply the sight of innocence under threat. Whatever it was, Marcus felt the first crack in the armor he had spent 20 years building. The mansion suddenly felt different, less like a fortress and more like what it actually was: a home with room for people who had nowhere else to go. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, broken only by Sophia's quiet sniffling against her mother's shoulder. Marcus found himself studying the intricate Persian rug beneath his feet, a priceless tabriz that had belonged to his grandmother, the only family member who had ever shown him unconditional love. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was standing on a piece of his past while confronting a future he had never imagined. "Where were you planning to go tonight?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught him to gather information before making decisions. But this wasn't a corporate merger. This was human crisis management. And he felt woefully unprepared. Rosa's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. I don't know. Maybe the shelter on Amsterdam Avenue, but they have a waiting list. Or the subway station, at least until morning. Her voice cracked on the last words, the admission of their desperate circumstances hanging in the air like a confession. The subway? Marcus's composure slipped, revealing a flash of the protective fury that had once driven him to build his empire. You were going to take a child to sleep in the subway? Sophia finally lifted her head, her dark eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and defiance that reminded him painfully of his own childhood photographs. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of someone far older than her 8 years. "Mummy, is the bad man going to find us here too?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child had learned to live in constant fear, always looking over her shoulder, never feeling safe anywhere. He thought of his own daughter, the one he might have had if his ex-fiancée hadn't left him 3 years ago, claiming he was emotionally unavailable. She had been right, of course. But now he wondered what kind of father his emotional distance might have made him. "No, Mija," Rosa whispered, stroking Sophia's hair with trembling fingers. "We won't stay long enough for him to find us." Marcus walked to the bedroom's bay window, his polished Oxford shoes silent on the hardwood floors. Outside, Central Park stretched in autumn glory, the trees dressed in gold and crimson. Families walked the paths below, fathers pushing strollers, mothers chasing laughing children, couples holding hands in the fading light. It was a world he observed but had never truly participated in, content to remain behind his walls of wealth and solitude. The guest wing of his mansion had 6 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom and sitting area. They remained perpetually ready for visitors who never came, professionally decorated spaces that existed more as showpieces than functional rooms. His housekeeper, Rosa, had maintained them with the same meticulous care she showed the rest of the house, never knowing she might one day need their sanctuary herself. "There's a guest suite on the 3rd floor," Marcus said finally, his words falling into the charged silence. "It has its own entrance through the service elevator. You could stay there tonight." Rosa's gasp was audible. "Mr. Wellington, I couldn't possibly—" "It's not charity," Marcus interrupted, his tone sharper than intended. The word charity triggered something deep within him. Memories of his mother's pride as she refused help from neighbors even when they had nothing to eat. Consider it employee housing. Temporary employee housing. Sophia peeked around her mother again, and Marcus caught sight of a small scar above her left eyebrow. Another story of violence that would probably never be told. She clutched her stuffed elephant tighter, and he noticed that one of its ears had been carefully sewn back on with mismatched thread. Even her toys bore the evidence of a turbulent life. "How long?" Rosa asked, her voice barely audible. "How long could we stay?" The question hung in the air, and Marcus realized he didn't have an answer. His entire adult life had been built on predictability and control. He knew exactly where he would be next month, next quarter, next year. But looking at this woman and child who had materialized in his bedroom like refugees from someone else's nightmare, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. "We'll figure it out," he heard himself saying, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. One day at a time. Rosa's tears began flowing freely now, but they were different tears, relief mixed with disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you. I can work extra hours. I can clean the entire house twice a day. I can... Rosa. Marcus's voice was firm but gentler than usual. You're already the best housekeeper I've ever had. Just continue doing what you're doing. Sophia whispered something in Spanish to her mother, too quiet for Marcus to understand. Rosa nodded and turned back to him. She wants to know if she has to hide under the bed again. The innocent question shattered something inside Marcus's chest. This child had spent her short life learning to make herself invisible, to hide from the people who should have protected her. He knelt down, bringing himself to Sophia's eye level, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. "No," he said, looking directly into her dark eyes. "You don't have to hide anymore. This house has an alarm system and security cameras. No one can get in without permission." Sophia studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this strange man in the expensive suit could be trusted. Finally, she nodded once, a tiny gesture that somehow felt monumental. "Can I see the room?" she asked, her voice still barely above a whisper. Marcus felt an unexpected smile tug at the corners of his mouth. "Of course. It has a view of the park, and there's a desk where you could draw if you wanted to. You know I like to draw. I've seen your pictures on your mother's phone when she was showing me they were clean," Marcus lied smoothly. In truth, he had never paid attention to Rosa's personal life, had actively avoided learning anything about her beyond her work performance. But something about Sophia's hopeful expression made him want to be the kind of person who noticed such things. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself carrying Sophia's single small suitcase up the marble staircase to the 3rd floor. Rosa followed behind, clutching a garbage bag that apparently contained the rest of their possessions. The contrast between their meager belongings and his mansion's opulence was stark, almost embarrassing. The guest suite was decorated in soft blues and creams, with a queen-sized bed covered in Egyptian cotton linens, and a sitting area with 2 overstuffed armchairs positioned near the window. Sophia's eyes went wide as she took in the space, probably larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. "There's a small kitchen area," Marcus explained, opening a door to reveal a kitchenette with a refrigerator, microwave, and coffee maker. "And the bathroom is through there." Sophia wandered to the window, pressing her small hands against the glass as she stared out at Central Park. "Mummy, look! You can see the whole park from here." Rosa's voice was thick with emotion as she replied in Spanish, something about dreams and kindness that Marcus didn't quite catch. But he understood the sentiment when Sophia turned to him with the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "Thank you, Mr. Wellington," she said formally, as if she had been coached in proper manners despite her circumstances. "This is the most beautiful room I've ever seen." As Marcus left them to settle in, he paused at the door of his own bedroom, looking at the space beneath his bed where he had found them just an hour earlier. The Persian rug bore no evidence of their presence, Rosa's cleaning skills having already erased any physical trace of their fear. But something had fundamentally shifted in the atmosphere of his home. For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel empty. Walking to his study, Marcus poured himself 3 fingers of single malt scotch and stared out at the city lights, beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. In the span of one afternoon, his carefully ordered world had been turned upside down by a woman and child who represented everything he had spent his adult life avoiding. Unpredictability, emotional complexity, and the messy reality of human need. But as he sipped his scotch, Marcus realized something unexpected. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or acquisition deals or the next mountain to climb in his relentless pursuit of success. Instead, he was wondering whether Sophia had ever seen Central Park up close, whether she might like to feed the ducks at the reservoir, whether a little girl who drew pictures and clutched stuffed elephants might actually enjoy living in a house with 23 rooms. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first interesting challenge he had faced in years. The first week passed in a series of awkward encounters and unspoken boundaries. Marcus found himself tiptoeing through his own home, hyper-aware of every creak in the floorboards that might disturb his unexpected guests. His morning routine, once a precisely choreographed sequence of shower, coffee, and financial news, now included listening for sounds from the third floor, wondering if Rosa and Sophia were awake, if they needed anything, if they were still there at all. Tuesday morning brought the first real test of their arrangement. Marcus was reviewing acquisition reports in his study when he heard it, a sound so foreign to his mansion that it took him several seconds to identify it. Laughter. High-pitched, genuine childlike laughter echoing down from the guest suite above. He found himself abandoning his work to investigate, climbing the service stairs he had rarely used in 5 years of living in the mansion. The sound grew louder as he approached the third floor, accompanied by Rosa's voice speaking animated Spanish. When he reached the landing, he could see through the partially open door that Sophia was jumping on the guest bed, her stuffed elephant clutched in one hand while she attempted to touch the ceiling with the other. "Más alto, mija. You almost got it that time," Rosa encouraged, her own laughter mixing with her daughter's. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, watching this display of pure joy in a room that had never hosted anything more exciting than his monthly meetings with interior designers. Sophia's hair had escaped its careful ponytail, flying wildly around her face as she bounced. Her worn pajamas, too small and faded from multiple washings, couldn't diminish the radiance of her smile. The moment Rosa noticed him, the laughter died instantly. Sophia froze mid-jump, her expression transforming from joy to fear so quickly it made Marcus's chest ache. "Mr. Wellington," Rosa gasped, immediately moving to still Sophia's movements. "I'm so sorry. The bed is so bouncy, and Sophia has never... We'll stop immediately." "No," Marcus said quickly, noting how Sophia had instinctively moved behind her mother, using Rosa's body as a shield. I heard noise and wanted to make sure everything was all right." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken rules and expectations. Sophia peeked around Rosa's legs, her dark eyes studying Marcus's face for signs of anger or disapproval. He realized with sudden clarity that this child had learned to read adult moods as a survival skill, constantly gauging whether she was safe or in danger. "The bed can handle it," Marcus found himself saying. "It's a Hastings, made to last 100 years. A little jumping won't hurt it." Sophia's eyes widened with something approaching wonder. "Really? I can keep jumping?" "If you want to," Marcus replied, surprised by how much he meant it. Just maybe warn me next time so I don't think someone's breaking in." The small smile that crept across Sophia's face was worth more than any business deal he had ever closed. She resumed her jumping with renewed enthusiasm, and Marcus noticed that Rosa's shoulders had relaxed slightly, though wariness still shadowed her eyes. "She's never had her own room before," Rosa explained quietly. "We've always shared one bedroom, sometimes with my sister's family too. Having so much space, it's like magic to her." Marcus nodded, remembering his own childhood in Detroit, where he and his sister had shared not just a bedroom, but often a bed when the heat was turned off for non-payment. Luxury was relative, and he had forgotten what it felt like to experience wonder at simple things like high ceilings and soft mattresses. Wednesday brought a different challenge. Marcus returned from lunch to find Rosa in his kitchen, not cleaning as usual, but cooking. The air was filled with unfamiliar aromas, cumin, oregano, and something that made his mouth water despite his usual preference for ordered takeout from expensive restaurants. "I'm sorry," Rosa said immediately, noting his presence. "Sophia was hungry, and I thought I could make her something quick. I'll clean everything up." "What are you making?" Marcus asked, moving closer to peer into the pot on his rarely used stove. "Arroz con pollo." My grandmother's recipe. It's simple, but Sophia loves it. Rosa stirred the rice carefully, her movements efficient and practiced. I bought the ingredients myself. I didn't use any of your food. Marcus felt an unexpected stab of something. Guilt, perhaps, or shame. Did Rosa really think he would begrudge a hungry child a home-cooked meal? The realization that she felt the need to use her own meager resources while staying in his multi-million-dollar home made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't articulate. "You don't need to buy groceries," he said finally. "Consider it part of the arrangement." Sophia appeared in the doorway, drawn by the familiar sense of home cooking. She wore a school uniform that had seen better days. A white blouse with a small stain near the collar and a navy skirt that had been hemmed multiple times to accommodate her growth. But her hair was neatly braided and her face was bright with the anticipation of her favorite meal. "Mr. Wellington," she said formally, "would you like to try Mommy's arroz con pollo? It's the best in the whole world." The invitation was offered with such genuine pride that Marcus found himself nodding before his usual defenses could engage. Yes, that would be nice." 15 minutes later, Marcus Wellington III, a man who regularly dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, found himself sitting at his kitchen island eating rice and chicken from a ceramic bowl, listening to Sophia chatter about her day at PS 163. The food was simple but delicious, seasoned with care and love in ways that no expensive restaurant had ever managed. "My teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, said I'm really good at art," Sophia announced between bites. "She wants to enter my drawing in the school contest. Do you want to see it?" Before Marcus could respond, Sophia had bounded away to retrieve her backpack. She returned with a piece of construction paper that she placed carefully beside his bowl. The drawing showed a tall building, clearly meant to be his mansion, with 3 figures visible in an upper window. One was a woman with long dark hair, one was a small girl, and the third was a man in a suit. All 3 were smiling. "That's us," Sophia explained unnecessarily. "In our room, the one with the park view." Marcus stared at the drawing, noting the careful attention to detail, the way Sophia had attempted to recreate the mansion's architectural features, the tiny trees she had added to represent Central Park, the way she had drawn all 3 figures with their arms outstretched as if welcoming the world. But what struck him most was how she had included him in her picture of home, making him part of a family he had never asked to join. "It's very good," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Very accurate." Thursday brought the first real crisis. Marcus was in his home office when Rosa knocked on the door, her face pale with worry. "Mr. Wellington, I'm sorry to bother you, but Sophia's school called." She got in a fight. Marcus looked up from his computer screen, noting the way Rosa's hands shook as she clutched her cell phone. "A fight? Is she hurt?" "No, but she hit another boy. They want me to come pick her up immediately." Rosa's voice was tight with stress. "The thing is, I don't have a car, and the subway takes 45 minutes each way. If I leave now and take her home, I won't be back in time to finish your laundry, and dinner won't be ready when you—" "Rosa," Marcus interrupted, already reaching for his car keys. "I'll drive you." The surprise on Rosa's face was almost comical. "You'll what?" "I'll drive you to the school. It's faster than the subway, and you won't have to worry about the timing." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself in the principal's office of PS 163, a public elementary school on the Upper West Side that bore no resemblance to the exclusive private academies he had attended. The walls were covered with student artwork and motivational posters. The furniture was worn but clean, and the air hummed with the controlled chaos of hundreds of children learning and growing. Sophia sat in a chair outside the principal's office, her school uniform rumpled and her usually neat braids disheveled. When she saw Rosa and Marcus approaching, her face crumpled with shame and relief. "Mummy, I'm sorry," she whispered as Rosa knelt beside her chair. "I didn't mean to get in trouble. Principal Martinez, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, ushered them into her office and explained the situation. A boy named Tyler had been teasing Sophia about her weird accent and had pushed her during recess. Sophia had pushed back, and when Tyler called her mother a name that Principal Martinez refused to repeat, Sophia had hit him. "I understand that Sophia was provoked," Principal Martinez said carefully, "but we have a zero-tolerance policy for physical violence. I'm required to suspend her for the rest of the day." Marcus felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness as he looked at Sophia's downcast face. This child, who had endured violence at home and had finally found a safe place, was being punished for defending herself and her mother. The injustice of it made his blood pressure spike. "What about the boy who started it?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to demanding answers. "Tyler will also face consequences," the principal assured him. "But Sophia needs to understand that violence is never the solution to conflict." As they drove home in Marcus's Bentley, Sophia was unusually quiet in the back seat. Rosa kept apologizing for the disruption to Marcus's day, but he found himself more concerned with the defeated slump of Sophia's shoulders than his missed appointments. "Sophia," he said finally, catching her eyes in the rearview mirror, "you want to tell me what really happened?" Her story came out in fits and starts, how Tyler had been picking on her for weeks, how he had said her mother was just a maid and didn't belong in their neighborhood, how he had pushed her hard enough to scrape her knee. The final straw had been when Tyler called Rosa a word that made Sophia's eyes fill with tears, just remembering it. "I know hitting is wrong," Sophia said quietly, "but nobody else was going to stop him, and he was being mean about Mummy." Marcus felt something fierce and protective unfurl in his chest. This 8-year-old girl had been defending her mother's honor with the same instinct that had driven him to build his business empire, the need to protect what mattered most. The difference was that Sophia had been willing to risk punishment for love, while Marcus had spent years avoiding love altogether to eliminate the risk. That evening, as he worked late in his study, Marcus could hear Rosa helping Sophia with homework at the kitchen table. Their voices drifted through the mansion, patient explanations of math problems, gentle corrections of pronunciation, the easy intimacy of a mother and daughter who had faced the world together and survived. For the first time in years, Marcus's empty mansion felt full. The second week brought an unwelcome visitor that shattered the fragile peace settling over the mansion. Marcus was reviewing quarterly reports in his study when the doorbell rang with sharp, insistent urgency. He glanced at his watch, 7:30 p.m., well past normal visiting hours. His security system showed a middle-aged woman on the front steps, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed despite the October wind, her designer coat buttoned against the evening chill. "Shit," Marcus muttered under his breath, recognizing his older sister Victoria immediately. She had the same sharp cheekbones and piercing grey eyes as Marcus, but where his features had been hardened by years of corporate warfare, hers bore the softer edges of someone who had never truly struggled. At 42, Victoria Wellington Ashford lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, with her investment banker husband and 2 teenage children who attended boarding school in Switzerland. Marcus hadn't spoken to Victoria in 6 months. Not since their explosive argument about their parents' estate. She had accused him of abandoning his family's humble roots and becoming obsessed with wealth for its own sake. He had countered that she only cared about family when it came with financial benefits. Both accusations had been painfully accurate. "Marcus," Victoria said when he opened the door, her smile as sharp as her Louboutin heels, "aren't you going to invite your only sister inside?" Before he could respond, she was already sweeping past him into the foyer, her critical gaze taking in the marble floors and crystal chandelier with the practiced eye of someone who measured everything by its monetary value. Marcus closed the door with deliberate calm, his mind racing through possible explanations for her unexpected visit. Victoria. What brings you to Manhattan on a Thursday evening? Can't a sister visit her brother without an ulterior motive? She paused in front of a Monet water lily painting, one of Marcus's most prized possessions. Though I have to say, this place feels different. Less like a museum, more like someone actually lives here. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Victoria had always been perceptive, able to read people and situations with uncomfortable accuracy. It was what made her so effective at her job as a high-end real estate broker and so dangerous as a family member with her own agenda. "I've been making some changes," Marcus said carefully. "Can I offer you a drink?" "In martini, extra dry, 3 olives," Victoria replied, settling herself on his Italian leather sofa as if she owned it. "So tell me about these changes. Have you finally decided to start living instead of just accumulating?" From upstairs came the sound of running water, Rosa giving Sophia a bath before bedtime. Marcus prayed they would stay on the 3rd floor until Victoria left, but he knew his sister's visits were never brief. She had inherited their mother's talent for drawing out conversations until she extracted whatever information she was seeking. "I've been working from home more," Marcus said, pouring gin into a crystal shaker with hands that remained perfectly steady despite his inner turmoil. "Finding better work-life balance." "Work-life balance?" Victoria laughed, the sound carrying notes of disbelief and amusement. "Marcus, you've never had a life to balance work against. The closest thing you've had to a relationship in 3 years was that merger with the Chicago firm." Marcus handed her the martini, noting how her manicured fingers immediately began drumming against the glass, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Victoria was fishing for something specific, and her unexpected visit wasn't social. "How's Richard?" Marcus asked, deflecting with questions about her husband. "Still moving money around for people richer than God?" Victoria's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. "Richard's fine. The kids are fine. Everyone's fine." She took a large sip of her martini, and Marcus caught the slight tremor in her hand as she set the glass down. "Actually, that's part of why I'm here. I've been thinking about our conversation last spring, about Dad's business philosophy. Their father, Marcus Wellington Jr., had built a small construction company in Detroit through sheer determination and 18-hour workdays. He had died when Marcus was 25, leaving behind a modest inheritance and a philosophy that money was meant to be used, not hoarded. Victoria had been throwing that philosophy in Marcus's face for years, arguing that he should be more generous with family, more willing to share his success. "What about Dad's philosophy?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair across from her with his own scotch. "He always said that family comes first, that success means nothing if you don't use it to help the people you love." Victoria's voice carried a rehearsed quality that made Marcus's internal alarms ring louder. "I've been wondering if maybe it's time for you to consider liquidating some assets, enjoying life more, helping family members who might be facing challenges." There it was, the real reason for her visit. Marcus had suspected for months that Victoria and Richard were having financial troubles. Richard's investment firm had been hit hard by the market volatility of the past year, and maintaining their Greenwich lifestyle was expensive even on a banker's salary. "What kind of challenges?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral. Victoria's composure cracked slightly, revealing the desperation she had been hiding behind designer clothes and practiced smiles. "Richard's firm is restructuring. There have been some losses, some bad investments. Nothing permanent, but we could use some temporary assistance to bridge the gap." "How much temporary assistance?" "2 million. Maybe 3. Victoria's words came out in a rush. "I know it sounds like a lot, but it's nothing compared to what you're worth. And it's family, Marcus. When have I ever asked you for anything?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with years of accumulated resentment and unspoken accusations. Victoria had never asked for money directly, but she had spent decades implying that Marcus owed her something for his success, for escaping their childhood poverty, for leaving Detroit and never looking back. Before Marcus could respond, The sound of footsteps on the main staircase drew both their attention. Sophia appeared first, her hair damp from her bath, and wearing pajamas that Rosa had clearly tried to make presentable despite their worn condition. She carried her stuffed elephant in one hand and a glass of water in the other, moving with the careful steps of a child trying not to spill. Rosa followed close behind, her own hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual work uniform. She looked younger in casual clothes, more like the 30-year-old woman she actually was than the invisible housekeeper Marcus had employed for 6 months. "Mr. Wellington," Rosa said, stopping short when she saw Victoria. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you had company." Sophia just wanted to say goodnight before bed. Victoria's sharp gaze took in every detail of the scene, the obvious intimacy between Rosa and Sophia, the way they both looked to Marcus for permission to continue, the domestic tranquility that had clearly been disrupted by her arrival. Marcus watched his sister's expression shift from confusion to calculation to something approaching understanding. "Well, well," Victoria said slowly, rising from the sofa with predatory grace. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your house guests?" Sophia moved instinctively closer to her mother, her dark eyes studying Victoria with the same wariness she had initially shown Marcus. Children who had learned to survive in volatile environments developed an uncanny ability to sense danger, and something about Victoria's smile was setting off every alarm in Sophia's young mind. "This is my sister." "Victoria!" Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled tension. "Victoria, this is Rosa, my housekeeper, and her daughter Sophia." "Your housekeeper," Victoria repeated, her tone making the words sound somehow inappropriate. "How modern of you to let the help bring their children to work." The casual cruelty of the comment hit its target perfectly. Rosa's face flushed with embarrassment and something approaching shame, while Sophia's grip tightened on her mother's hand. Marcus felt a surge of protective anger that surprised him with its intensity. "Rosa and Sophia are staying here temporarily," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same authority he used in hostile board meetings. "They're my guests." "Guests," Victoria mused, taking another sip of her martini while studying Rosa with unconcealed interest. "How long will you be staying?" "We're not sure yet," Rosa replied quietly, her accent more pronounced under stress. "Mr. Wellington has been very kind to us." "I'm sure he has," Victoria said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Marcus has always had a soft spot for charity cases." The words hung in the air like a slap. Sophia looked confused by the adult tension she could feel but not understand, while Rosa's face went pale with humiliation. Marcus felt something cold and furious settle in his chest, the same emotion that had driven him to destroy business competitors who threatened what he valued. "Good night." "Sophia," Marcus said firmly, his message clear. "Sweet dreams." Sophia looked between the adults uncertainly before stepping forward with the kind of courage that reminded Marcus why he had come to care about this child in just 2 weeks. "Good night." "Mr. Wellington," she said formally. Then with the devastating honesty of childhood she added, "I like living here. It feels safe." The simple statement cut through Victoria's sophisticated cruelty like a blade. Even she couldn't mock a child's need for safety, though Marcus could see her filing the information away for future use. After Rosa and Sophia disappeared up the stairs, Victoria turned to Marcus with renewed interest. "Well," she said, settling back onto the sofa, "this is an interesting development. How long has this arrangement been going on?" 2 weeks, Marcus replied, not bothering to lie. "Victoria would find out the truth eventually. She always did. And you just invited them to live here out of the goodness of your heart." Victoria's laugh was cold and calculating. "Marcus, you've never done anything purely out of kindness in your entire adult life. What's the real story?" Marcus considered his options. He could lie, could invent some business-related explanation for Rosa and Sophia's presence. But something about Sophia's simple declaration, It feels safe, made him reluctant to reduce their story to a convenient fiction. "Sometimes people need help," he said finally. "And sometimes helping them helps you too." Victoria studied his face with the intensity of a shark scenting blood in the water. "You care about them." About her, it wasn't a question. "My God, Marcus, you've gone and gotten yourself attached to a woman and her child. How deliciously human of you." The mocking tone made Marcus's jaw clench, but he forced himself to remain calm. Victoria was fishing for weakness, looking for leverage she could use to get what she wanted. His feelings for Rosa and Sophia, whatever those feelings might be, were not ammunition he was willing to hand over. "What I care about," Marcus said slowly, "is my privacy and my business, both of which you're currently disrupting." "Oh, I'm not disrupting anything," Victoria replied, finishing her martini with satisfaction. "I'm simply observing my little brother's touching transformation from ruthless businessman to, what would you call this, reluctant family man." She rose from the sofa, smoothing her designer coat with practiced elegance. "This has been illuminating, Marcus, truly. We should do it again soon." "Victoria," Marcus said as she reached the door, "whatever you're thinking, whatever angle you're working, leave them out of it." His sister turned back with a smile that reminded him exactly why he had learned to trust no one. "Marcus, darling, I'm not working any angle. I'm simply concerned about my brother's well-being. After all, what would Dad say about you playing house with the help and her illegitimate daughter?" The casual cruelty of the parting shot was vintage Victoria, precisely calculated to cause maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. Marcus watched her disappear into the night, knowing with absolute certainty that this wasn't the end of her interest in his domestic arrangements. As he climbed the stairs to check on Rosa and Sophia, Marcus realized that his carefully controlled world was about to become significantly more complicated. Victoria had always been dangerous when she wanted something, but now she had leverage, the knowledge that Marcus cared about people who could be hurt. For the first time since finding them under his bed, Marcus wondered if offering sanctuary had been a mistake that would end up costing them all more than they could afford to pay. The third week brought unexpected rhythms to Marcus's previously regimented existence. He found himself waking not to his usual 5:30 a.m. alarm, but to the sound of Sophia's laughter drifting down from the kitchen above. Rosa had taken to making breakfast for all three of them, a presumption that should have irritated him, but instead filled the mansion with aromas that reminded him of childhood mornings before his world had turned cold and calculating. Friday morning found Marcus standing in his walk-in closet, selecting a tie for another day of board meetings and acquisition negotiations. Through the floor, he could hear Sophia practicing her spelling words aloud, while Rosa quizzed her in her patient, encouraging voice. The domestic tranquility was so foreign to his usual morning silence that he found himself lingering longer than necessary, listening to their easy intimacy. Beautiful, Sophia spelled carefully. Beautiful. Like our room with the park view. Muy bien, mija, Rosa praised. Ah. Now try grateful. Grateful. Grateful, like how I feel about Mr. Wellington letting us stay here. Marcus paused in the act of knotting his Hermes tie, struck by the genuine appreciation in Sophia's young voice. When had anyone last been grateful for his presence rather than his money? His ex-fiancée Catherine had appreciated his penthouse and his connections. His business associates valued his financial acumen, but no one had ever been grateful simply for his kindness, probably because he had spent so many years convinced that kindness was a luxury he couldn't afford. By the time Marcus reached the kitchen, Rosa had prepared what was becoming their regular breakfast: scrambled eggs with fresh herbs, wheat toast, and coffee that somehow tasted better than anything his previous housekeeper had ever made. Sophia sat at the kitchen island in her school uniform, her dark hair braided with mathematical precision, her backpack organized and ready for another day at PS 163. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," Sophia said formally, though her smile was becoming more natural each day. "Mummy made extra eggs in case you wanted some." "Thank you," Marcus replied, accepting the plate Rosa offered with a shy smile. "How's the spelling test preparation going?" "Really good. I know all 20 words now. Mrs. Rodriguez said if I get them all right, I can help her decorate the classroom for Halloween." Sophia's excitement was infectious, her whole face lighting up at the prospect of such responsibility. Marcus found himself smiling as he ate breakfast with them, something that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks ago. His morning routine had always been sacred. Coffee, financial news, 30 minutes on the treadmill, shower, dress, and out the door by 7:15 a.m. sharp. But somehow this new ritual of shared breakfast and Sophia's chatter about school felt more satisfying than his previous isolation. "What about you, Rosa?" Marcus asked, noting how she always waited for Sophia and him to eat before serving herself. "How are things at your other job?" Rosa worked part-time at a bodega in Washington Heights, taking the subway an hour each way to stock shelves and run the register for an owner who paid her under the table. It was honest work, but Marcus had started to wonder why someone with Rosa's intelligence and work ethic was settling for minimum-wage jobs that offered no security or benefits. "It's fine," Rosa replied carefully. "Mr. Herrera is understanding about me leaving early to pick up Sophia from school. Not all employers are so flexible." The careful way she spoke suggested there was more to the story, but Marcus had learned not to push for information Rosa wasn't ready to share. Trust was something that had to be earned gradually, especially from people who had been hurt by those who were supposed to protect them. "Have you ever thought about doing something different?" Marcus asked. "You're clearly intelligent, you speak 3 languages fluently. You have excellent organizational skills." Rosa's laugh held a note of bitterness that reminded Marcus how different their worlds were. "Mr. Wellington, people like me don't get to choose careers. We take whatever jobs we can find that pay enough to keep our children fed and housed. Dreams are luxuries I can't afford." The words stung because they echoed his own childhood, when his mother had cleaned other people's houses while his father worked construction jobs that barely covered their rent. Marcus had escaped that world through scholarships and sheer determination, but he had never forgotten the weight of poverty, the way it crushed dreams before they could take root. "What would you do?" Marcus pressed. "If money wasn't an issue, if you could do anything." Sophia looked up from her eggs with interest, as if she had never considered that her mother might have dreams beyond survival. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes studying Marcus's face as if trying to determine whether his question was genuine or merely polite conversation. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said finally. "Before Sophia's father, before everything fell apart, I was studying education at Hunter College. I had 2 years left when—" She trailed off, her hands absently smoothing Sophia's hair. "But that was a long time ago. Different life." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of talent wasted and dreams deferred. Rosa had the patience of a natural educator, the intelligence to succeed in any classroom, and the kind of genuine care for children that couldn't be taught. The fact that circumstances had forced her into cleaning houses and stocking shelves felt like a crime against potential. "It's never too late to finish," Marcus said quietly. "Hunter College has night programs, weekend classes. With what money?" Rosa's question was blunt, stripped of politeness. "Even if I could afford tuition, who would watch Sophia during classes? Who would pay our living expenses while I, student, taught for free? Mr. Wellington, I appreciate the thought, but some doors close and stay closed." The conversation was interrupted by Sophia's announcement that she needed to leave for school. Marcus watched Rosa help her daughter gather her backpack and lunch, noting the careful way Rosa checked to make sure Sophia had her inhaler, her emergency contact card, her subway MetroCard for after-school programs. Every detail was attended to with the precision of someone who couldn't afford to forget anything important. "Can I walk with you to the subway?" Marcus found himself asking. "I'm heading downtown anyway." Sophia's face lit up with pleasure at the suggestion, while Rosa looked surprised but pleased. 5 minutes later, Marcus Wellington III was walking down West 86th Street in his $2,000 suit, carrying an 8-year-old's backpack and listening to her excited chatter about her school's upcoming Halloween pageant. "We get to dress up as our heroes," Sophia explained, skipping slightly to keep up with Marcus's longer stride. "Mrs. Rodriguez said heroes can be anyone who helps other people or makes the world better. I wanted to dress up as Mummy, but she said I should pick someone more famous." "Why did you want to dress as your mother?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "Because she's the bravest person I know," Sophia replied without hesitation. "She left the bad man even though she was scared, and she takes care of me even when she's tired, and she always finds a way to make everything okay. Isn't that what heroes do?" Marcus glanced at Rosa, noting the tears gathering in her eyes at her daughter's simple declaration. Out of the mouths of babes came wisdom that adults often missed. Rosa was indeed a hero, just not the kind that got movies made about them. At the subway entrance, Sophia surprised Marcus by hugging him goodbye, a quick, impulsive gesture that she seemed to immediately regret when she realized what she had done. "Sorry," she said, stepping back with embarrassment. "I forgot we're not really family." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Sophia, you don't need to apologize for hugging someone, and you don't need permission to consider someone family." Her smile in response was radiant enough to power half of Manhattan. That afternoon, Marcus found himself leaving his office early, something that would have scandalized his assistant if she hadn't been watching his gradual transformation with fascinated approval. He stopped at FAO Schwartz, ostensibly to buy Sophia something for Halloween, but found himself overwhelmed by the sheer variety of toys available to children whose parents had unlimited budgets. He finally settled on an art set, professional-grade colored pencils, sketchbooks, and drawing tools that cost more than many families spent on groceries in a month. But remembering Sophia's crude drawings and her obvious talent, Marcus thought the investment might be worthwhile. Art had been his own escape as a child, the one thing that made him feel special before business had taught him that specialness came from winning. When he arrived home, he found Rosa in the living room with a laptop that had clearly seen better days, surrounded by papers and textbooks that looked decades old. She quickly closed the laptop when she saw him, gathering the papers with obvious embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know I shouldn't be working on personal things in your living room. I'll move everything upstairs." "What are you working on?" Marcus asked, setting down his briefcase and the FAO Schwartz bag. Rosa hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. "I've been looking into online courses. Nothing serious, just exploring options for continuing education. But most programs require computer access for assignments, and mine barely functions." Marcus glanced at the ancient laptop, noting its cracked screen and missing keys. The fact that Rosa was trying to better herself, despite every obstacle in her path, reminded him why he had been drawn to her quiet determination from the beginning. "Use mine," Marcus said, nodding toward his home office. "I have 3 computers, desktop, laptop, and tablet. Take whatever you need." "I couldn't," Rosa protested. "Those are expensive, and I don't know anything about maintaining high-end equipment." "Rosa," Marcus interrupted gently, "they're tools." "Tools are meant to be used. If you're serious about going back to school, you'll need reliable technology." The gratitude in her eyes was almost overwhelming, but Marcus forced himself to maintain casual composure. He was learning that Rosa's pride was as fierce as her determination, and she was more likely to accept help if it was offered matter-of-factly rather than as charity. Sophia's delighted squeals over the Art set that evening provided the perfect soundtrack to what was becoming Marcus's favorite time of day, the hour after dinner, when work was forgotten and the mansion felt like an actual home. She immediately began sketching portraits of her stuffed elephant, her tongue poking out in concentration as she tried to capture every detail with her new colored pencils. "Look, Mr. Wellington," she said, holding up her first drawing. "It's Ellie, but now she looks like she's really alive instead of just stuffed." Marcus studied the sketch, genuinely impressed by Sophia's natural eye for proportion and detail. With proper instruction and quality materials, this child could develop real artistic talent, the kind that opened doors to scholarships and opportunities. "Have you ever thought about art lessons?" Marcus asked. "There are programs at the Museum of Natural History, classes for children who show promise." "Those cost money," Sophia said pragmatically, with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who had learned early that wanting and having were very different things. "Some of them offer scholarships," Marcus replied carefully, "for students who demonstrate exceptional ability." As Sophia returned to her drawing and Rosa worked on her laptop in the adjoining room, Marcus realized that his carefully controlled life was being transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated. 3 weeks ago, his primary concerns had been quarterly earnings and acquisition targets. Now he found himself researching children's art programs and wondering whether Rosa's dream of teaching was as impossible as she believed. The mansion no longer felt like a fortress. Against the world, it felt like a home where people grew and dreamed and supported each other's ambitions. For a man who had spent decades convinced that caring was weakness, Marcus was discovering that maybe his greatest strength lay not in his ability to remain detached, but in his capacity to love people who needed him as much as he was beginning to need them. The transformation terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. The fourth week brought the kind of October storm that transforms Manhattan into a battlefield of wind and rain. Marcus stood at his office window on the 32nd floor, watching sheets of water lash against the glass, while his assistant rescheduled meetings that had been rendered impossible by the weather. The city below looked like a watercolor painting left in the rain, all blurred edges and running colors. His phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. "Sophia's school closed early. Picking her up now. Hope you're staying dry." It was the kind of casual, caring message that spouses sent each other, and Marcus felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee cooling on his desk. Over the past month, these small intimacies had become the highlights of his day, proof that he mattered to someone beyond his ability to sign checks or close deals. By the time Marcus battled through the storm-flooded streets to reach his mansion, he was soaked despite his umbrella and expensive raincoat. He found Rosa and Sophia in the kitchen, both wrapped in blankets and sharing hot chocolate while they watched the storm rage beyond the windows. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly normal, that Marcus felt his usual stress dissolve like sugar in rain. "Mr. Wellington," Sophia exclaimed, jumping up to greet him. "You look like you went swimming in your clothes." "It feels like I did," Marcus replied, accepting the towel Rosa offered with a grateful smile. "How was the early dismissal adventure?" Scary but fun," Sophia said honestly. "The wind was so strong it almost blew me away, but Mummy held my hand really tight. And we saw a taxi that looked like it was floating." Rosa's expression was more subdued than her daughter's excitement suggested. "The subway was partially flooded," she explained quietly. "We had to take a different route home, and some of the stations were closed. I was worried we might get stuck underground." Marcus noted the tension in Rosa's voice, the way her hands trembled slightly around her mug of hot chocolate. For someone who had learned to navigate the city's dangers as a matter of survival, being trapped in a storm with her child would have triggered every protective instinct she possessed. "Well, you're both safe now," Marcus said, settling into a chair at the kitchen island. "And frankly, this seems like the perfect weather for staying inside and doing absolutely nothing productive." Sophia giggled at the idea of Mr. Wellington, who seemed to work constantly, deliberately choosing to be unproductive. Can we really do nothing? Like watch movies and eat popcorn and build blanket forts? Marcus looked at Rosa, who was trying to hide her smile behind her mug. I don't see why not. Though I should warn you, I've never built a blanket fort in my life. Then it's time you learned, Sophia declared with the authority of an 8-year-old who considered herself an expert in the essential life skills adults seem to have forgotten. An hour later, Marcus found himself crawling around his living room floor, helping Sophia and Rosa construct an elaborate fort using expensive throw pillows, cashmere blankets, and furniture that cost more than most people's cars. His Armani suit was wrinkled beyond repair, his hair was disheveled, and he was having more fun than he'd had in years. The entrance needs to be bigger, Sophia directed from inside their creation. Mr. Wellington is too tall to fit through that opening. Maybe Mr. Wellington should have been built smaller, Rosa teased, earning a laugh from Sophia and a mock-offended look from Marcus. I'll have you know I'm the perfect height for intimidating business rivals and reaching things on high shelves, Marcus replied with exaggerated dignity. Blanket fort architecture was not a consideration during my design phase. As the afternoon wore on, they settled inside their fort with Sophia's art supplies, playing games and telling stories while the storm continued its assault on the city outside. Marcus found himself sharing carefully edited tales from his childhood in Detroit, the good memories he had buried beneath years of corporate success.
Rosa
Reciprocated with stories of her own childhood in Puerto Rico, painting pictures of warm beaches and extended family gatherings that made Sophia's eyes shine with longing for grandparents and cousins she had never met. Maybe someday we can visit Puerto Rico, Sophia said wistfully. I want to see the beach where Mummy learned to swim. Maybe someday we can, Rosa agreed softly, though Marcus caught the sadness in her voice. International travel was another luxury that existed in the realm of impossible dreams for a woman working multiple minimum-wage jobs. As evening approached, the storm showed no signs of abating. Marcus ordered dinner from an upscale Italian restaurant, reasoning that if they were going to be trapped inside, they might as well eat well. When the delivery arrived, they spread the containers on the coffee table and ate picnic-style in their blanket fort, using his finest china in the most casual setting it had ever experienced. This is the best storm day ever, Sophia announced around a mouthful of pasta. It's like we're camping, but with better food and no bugs. And no chance of bears, Marcus added, earning another giggle. Are there really bears when you go camping? Sophia asked with wide eyes. Sometimes, Marcus replied, but they're usually more afraid of you than you are of them. Were you ever afraid of bears when you were little? The innocent question caught Marcus off guard, bringing back memories he had spent years suppressing. I was afraid of a lot of things when I was little, he said honestly. But not bears. Different kinds of dangers. Rosa's eyes met his across the makeshift table, and he saw understanding there, recognition of childhood fears that had nothing to do with wildlife and everything to do with the people who were supposed to provide safety. Sophia, oblivious to the adult subtext, continued chattering about animals and adventures, but Marcus felt Rosa's silent sympathy like a warm hand on his shoulder. The peaceful evening was shattered at 9 o'clock by the harsh buzz of the security intercom. Marcus frowned as he checked the camera feed, his stomach dropping when he recognized the figure hunched against the storm at his front gate. Detective Ray Morrison from the NYPD's Domestic Violence Unit stood in the rain, his badge visible despite the weather. Rosa, Marcus called quietly, his voice tight with controlled concern. There's a police detective at the door. The color drained from Rosa's face as she instinctively pulled Sophia closer. Did he find us? Did Miguel call the police about us being here? I don't know, Marcus replied, already moving toward the door. But I'm going to find out. Detective Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s, with the patient eyes of someone who had seen too much human cruelty but hadn't given up hope for justice. He showed his badge and identification before speaking, his voice carefully neutral in the way of cops delivering potentially devastating news. "Mr. Wellington, I'm looking for Rosa Hernandez and her daughter Sophia. I understand they may be staying here." "They are," Marcus replied carefully. "Oh, what's this about?" "Miguel Hernandez, Rosa's ex-husband, was arrested this afternoon for violating a restraining order. He was found outside Sophia's school with a weapon, apparently planning to wait for them to come out. School security called us when they recognized him from the photos Rosa had provided." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Miguel had been hunting them, had come armed to his daughter's school with violent intentions. If the storm hadn't caused early dismissal, if Rosa and Sophia had been following their normal routine. "Is he in custody?" Marcus asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Yes, but that's not why I'm here," Detective Morrison continued. "During his arrest, Hernandez made some concerning statements about tracking them to this address. He claims to have friends watching the house, people who've been reporting back to him about their activities." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. For weeks, he had believed his mansion was a sanctuary, that his wealth and security systems could protect Rosa and Sophia from their past. But if Miguel had been watching them, if he knew where they lived and how they spent their days, then nowhere was safe. "What kind of statements?" Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "Specific details about their daily routines, times they leave and return, descriptions of clothing they've worn. Either he's been watching personally, or someone has been feeding him information." Detective Morrison's expression was grim. "Mr. Wellington, these people are in serious danger. Hernandez is escalating, and men like him don't stop until they get what they want, or until someone stops them permanently." Through the rain-streaked windows, Marcus could see Rosa and Sophia huddled together in their blanket fort. Sophia's art supplies scattered around them like the remnants of an interrupted childhood. The domestic tranquility they had built together suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass, beautiful but easily shattered by the reality of violence that had followed them, even here. "What do you recommend?" Marcus asked, his mind already racing through options and contingencies. "Honestly? Relocation, new identities if necessary. There are programs for domestic violence victims, safe houses where they can start over without leaving a trail for him to follow." Detective Morrison paused, studying Marcus's face with cop-trained perception. "Of course, that would mean leaving everything behind, including whatever life they've built here." The suggestion felt like a knife to Marcus's chest. The idea of Rosa and Sophia disappearing into some anonymous witness protection program, of never seeing Sophia's bright smile or hearing Rosa's gentle laugh, was unbearable. But the alternative, staying and risking their safety, was worse. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. "Hernandez will be in custody for 48 to 72 hours, depending on bail proceedings. After that," Detective Morrison shrugged, "men like him don't give up easy. And if he really does have people watching this house, then everyone inside is at risk." As if summoned by their conversation, Sophia appeared in the doorway, her hair mussed from playing in the blanket fort and her eyes bright with innocent curiosity. "Mr. Wellington, is everything okay? Mummy's getting worried because you've been talking to that man for a long time." Marcus looked at this child who'd become so precious to him in such a short time, knowing that forces beyond their control were about to tear apart the fragile family they had built together. The storm outside was nothing compared to the hurricane of violence and fear that was about to descend on their carefully constructed sanctuary. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Marcus lied smoothly. "Just some business to take care of. Why don't you go back to your mom?" "I'll be there in a minute." As Sophia skipped away, Detective Morrison lowered his voice. "You care about them. I can see it. But caring isn't enough to stop a bullet or a knife. If you really want to protect them, you need to let them go somewhere safe." Marcus nodded, understanding the detective's logic, even as everything in him rebelled against it. He had spent his adult life believing that money could solve any problem, that wealth was the ultimate protection against the world's cruelties. But Rosa and Sophia's safety couldn't be bought. It could only be preserved by sacrificing everything they had built together. The storm outside was beginning to weaken, but Marcus knew that the real tempest was just beginning. By the time the rain stopped, decisions would have to be made that would change all their lives forever. And for the first time since he had found them hiding under his bed, Marcus wasn't sure he was strong enough to make the right choice. The morning after Detective Morrison's visit dawned with the deceptive clarity that follows violent storms. Marcus stood in his study at 5:30 a.m., watching the sunrise paint Central Park in shades of gold and amber, while his mind churned through impossible choices. He hadn't slept, spending the night researching witness protection programs, safe houses, and security companies that specialized in protecting domestic violence victims. On his desk lay 3 folders, one containing information about federal relocation programs, another with details about private security firms, and a third outlining legal options for obtaining permanent restraining orders. Each represented a different path forward, and each came with costs that went far beyond money. The sound of Sophia's laughter drifted down from the kitchen, where she and Rosa were preparing breakfast with the same easy domesticity that had become the rhythm of their days. The normalcy of it, the mother-daughter banter, the clatter of dishes, the warm scents of coffee and toast, felt precious and fragile in the wake of last night's revelations. Marcus made his decision with the same cold calculation that had built his business empire. He would give Rosa and Sophia every option, lay out all the possibilities without pressuring them toward any particular choice. But privately, he was already making calls to ensure that whatever they decided, they would have the resources to survive and thrive. "Good morning," Rosa said, when Marcus entered the kitchen, though her smile was strained around the edges. "I made extra coffee. I figured we all might need it today." Sophia looked up from her cereal bowl with the resilience of childhood that never failed to amaze Marcus. Despite overhearing fragments of last night's conversation, she seemed determined to treat this as just another day in their shared life. "Mr. Wellington, can you help me with my math homework after school?" she asked. "We're learning about fractions, and I don't understand why you have to find common denominators." The request was so normal, so beautifully ordinary, that Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion he couldn't afford to show. "Of course," he said gently, "fractions can be tricky, but once you understand the logic, they make perfect sense." "Like people," Sophia said with 8-year-old wisdom. "Mommy says people are like fractions. 2, you have to find what you have in common before you can add yourselves together to make something bigger." Rosa's face flushed at her daughter's innocent revelation of their private conversations, but Marcus found himself smiling despite the gravity of their situation. In the span of 5 weeks, this child had somehow learned to see their unlikely trio as a mathematical equation that actually balanced. After Sophia left for school, escorted by a plainclothes security officer, Marcus had hired overnight. He and Rosa settled in his study to discuss their options. The morning light streaming through the windows couldn't dispel the shadows that had fallen over their carefully constructed sanctuary. "Detective Morrison called this morning," Marcus began, opening the first folder. "Miguel made bail. He's out, but with strict conditions. GPS monitoring, no contact orders, mandatory anger management. It buys us time, but not safety." Rosa's hands trembled as she accepted the coffee he offered. "How much time?" "The ankle monitor can be removed in 6 weeks if he complies with all conditions. But realistically, men like him find ways around restrictions when they're motivated enough." Marcus kept his voice clinical, professional, though every word felt like glass in his throat. "We need to assume he's still a threat. What are our options?" Rosa asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Marcus opened the folders one by one, explaining each possibility with the thoroughness he would bring to any business presentation. The Federal Witness Protection Program could provide new identities and relocation anywhere in the country, but it would mean cutting all ties to their previous lives, including him. Private safe houses offered temporary sanctuary while legal proceedings played out, but with no guarantee of long-term security. Enhanced personal security could protect them here, but would turn their lives into a fortress existence of bodyguards and bulletproof glass. "There's a fourth option," Marcus said finally, opening a folder he had prepared himself. "I've been researching schools in Switzerland, places where Sophia could continue her education while you finish your teaching degree. European privacy laws would make it nearly impossible for Miguel to track you, and the distance would provide natural protection." Rosa stared at him with something approaching shock. "You're suggesting we leave the country?" "I'm suggesting you consider all possibilities," Marcus replied carefully. "Money isn't an obstacle. I can arrange visas, housing, tuition, living expenses, whatever you need to start over somewhere safe." "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Why would you do that for us?" Marcus looked out at Central Park, where early morning joggers were already reclaiming the paths from last night's storm. How could he explain that in 5 weeks, Rosa and Sophia had become more important to him than deals worth millions of dollars? That the thought of losing them felt like losing pieces of himself he hadn't known existed. "Because you deserve to live without fear," he said finally. "Because Sophia deserves to grow up somewhere she can laugh without looking over her shoulder. Because sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do." Rosa was quiet for a long time, her dark eyes studying his face as if she could read the emotions he was trying so hard to control. "And what about you? In all these scenarios where we disappear to start new lives, where do you fit?" The question he had been dreading hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Marcus had spent 5 weeks falling in love with a life he had never planned, with a woman whose strength humbled him and a child whose laughter had taught him what home actually meant. But love, he had learned long ago, sometimes meant letting go. "I want you to be safe more than I want you to stay," Marcus said quietly. "That has to be enough." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's assistant, calling with news that sent ice through his veins. Victoria had scheduled a lunch meeting with 3 major business journalists, ostensibly to discuss family values in corporate leadership. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. His sister was making her move. "I have to go," Marcus told Rosa, gathering his folders with sharp, angry movements. "Victoria's about to cause problems, and I need to control the damage before it affects you and Sophia." "What kind of problems?" Rosa asked, but Marcus was already reaching for his coat. "The kind that turn private lives into public scandals," he replied grimly. "Don't worry about it, just think about what we discussed. All the options. Promise me you'll consider what's truly safest, not what you want most." The restaurant Victoria had chosen was the kind of Manhattan establishment where deals were made and reputations destroyed over $300 lunches. Marcus arrived to find his sister already holding court with 3 of the city's most influential business reporters, her smile sharp enough to cut steel. "Marcus!" Victoria exclaimed as he approached their table. "I was just telling Linda, James, and Robert about your fascinating new domestic arrangements. They're quite intrigued by your transformation from Manhattan's most eligible bachelor to, well, whatever it is you've become." Linda Chen from the Wall Street Journal leaned forward with predatory interest. "Mr. Wellington, is it true you're providing housing for your housekeeper and her illegitimate daughter?" "Our sources suggest this has been going on for over a month." Marcus settled into his chair with the calm of a man who had survived hostile takeovers and boardroom coups. "I'm providing temporary assistance to an employee facing a domestic violence situation. It's called human decency. You should look into it." "Human decency," James Miller from Bloomberg repeated with amusement. "That's an interesting way to describe cohabitation with the help." Some might call it poor judgment, especially for someone in your position. And what position is that? Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Well, Robert Torres from Forbes interjected, you're currently being considered for the Brennan Foundation's Humanitarian Award, worth $50 million in grants to worthy causes. The foundation values traditional family structures and moral leadership. Living with your housekeeper and her child might send the wrong message about your priorities. Victoria's smile was triumphant as she delivered the killing blow. Of course, if you were to liquidate some assets, perhaps help family members facing financial difficulties, it might demonstrate that your heart is in the right place. Traditional charity begins at home, after all. Marcus felt the trap closing around him with the precision of a Swiss watch. Victoria had done her homework, identifying the exact pressure points that would force him to choose between his public reputation and his private happiness. The Brennan Foundation Award wasn't just money. It was prestige, influence, and the kind of philanthropic platform that could shape policy for decades. Gentlemen, Marcus said, rising from his chair with calculated dignity. I think we're done here. Are we? Linda Chen asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Because this story is going to run with or without your cooperation. The question is whether you want to control the narrative or let others define it for you. As Marcus walked away from the table, leaving Victoria's laughter echoing behind him, he realized that the storm from last night had been just the beginning. Now he faced a hurricane of public scrutiny, family betrayal, and impossible choices that would determine not just his future, but the futures of the two people who had become more important to him than his own reputation. By the time he reached his office, Marcus knew that the careful balance they had maintained for 5 weeks was about to collapse. The question wasn't whether Rosa and Sophia would have to leave, it was whether he would be strong enough to let them go before his sister's machinations destroyed them all. The weight of that knowledge felt heavier than any business failure he had ever endured, because this time, losing meant losing everything that actually mattered. The story broke at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, hitting the internet like a digital wildfire that spread faster than Marcus could contain it. By the time he reached his mansion, news vans were already gathering outside the security gates, their satellite dishes rising like mechanical vultures against the October sky. The headline blazed across his phone screen: Manhattan mogul's secret family, billionaire's unconventional living arrangement raises questions. Marcus sat in his Bentley, engine idling, watching reporters position themselves for the evening news broadcasts. Through his bulletproof windows, he could see photographers with telephoto lenses pointed at every window of his home, waiting for a glimpse of the mysterious housekeeper and her child, who had apparently captured one of New York's most eligible bachelors. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from board members, investors, and business associates, all wanting explanations for a story that painted him as either a philanthropic saint or a man whose judgment had been compromised by an inappropriate relationship. The truth, as always, was more complicated than any headline could capture. Inside the mansion, Marcus found Rosa and Sophia huddled in the kitchen, the curtains drawn tight against the camera lenses pressed against the windows. Sophia clutched her stuffed elephant, while Rosa paced with barely contained panic, her phone in her hand showing the same article that was spreading across social media like digital poison. "I'm so sorry," Rosa said the moment she saw Marcus, tears streaming down her face. "This is all my fault. I never should have brought my problems into your life. I never should have let Sophia get attached to someone we had no right to love." The last word hung in the air between them like a confession that changed everything. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking but blooming, like a flower finally receiving sunlight after years in darkness. "Rosa," he said quietly, moving toward her with careful steps, "this isn't your fault. This is Victoria being vindictive and reporters being vultures. You didn't ask for any of this, But we made it worse by staying, Rosa replied, her voice thick with guilt and desperation. By letting ourselves believe this could work, by pretending we belonged in your world. Look at what it's cost you. Sophia looked between the adults with the wide-eyed awareness of a child who understood that her world was about to change again, probably not for the better. Are we in trouble? Are the bad men with cameras going to hurt us? Marcus knelt beside Sophia's chair, bringing himself to her eye level with the same gentleness he had learned over their weeks together. No one is going to hurt you, he said firmly. But there are going to be people asking questions, taking pictures, trying to find out things about our lives that aren't their business. Why? Sophia asked with the directness of childhood. We're not doing anything wrong. We're just living together like a family. The innocent observation cut through all the media spin and public relations concerns to the heart of what mattered. They had been living like a family, eating breakfast together, helping with homework, sharing stories and dreams, and the quiet intimacies that transformed a house into a home. The fact that it didn't fit conventional definitions of family didn't make it less real or less valuable. Marcus's phone rang again, displaying the name he had been dreading, Jonathan Brennan, chairman of the Brennan Foundation. The $50 million humanitarian award that had been within his grasp was about to slip away, along with the credibility and influence that came with it. Mr. Wellington, Brennan's voice was carefully neutral when Marcus answered. I'm sure you've seen the news coverage. The Foundation Board is concerned about the optics of your current situation. Concerned about what exactly? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. That I helped a woman and child escape domestic violence? That I provided shelter to people who needed it? Concerned about the appearance of impropriety? Brennan replied smoothly. The Foundation supports traditional family values and moral leadership. Your living arrangement, however well-intentioned, sends mixed messages about your judgment and priorities. Marcus looked at Rosa and Sophia. Seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time since that afternoon, he had found them hiding under his bed. Rosa, who worked 3 jobs to support her daughter and still made time to help with homework. Sophia, who drew pictures of their life together and called his mansion home, with the trust of a child who had finally found safety. These were his priorities, and his judgment told him they were worth more than any award or public recognition. Mr. Brennan, Marcus said quietly, with all due respect, if providing sanctuary to domestic violence victims conflicts with your foundation's values, then perhaps we have different definitions of humanity. The silence that followed told Marcus everything he needed to know. By the time he hung up, the Brennan Foundation Award was officially a lost cause, and with it went the respect of half the philanthropic community in New York. You shouldn't have done that, Rosa said, having overheard his side of the conversation. That award was important to you, to your business. You shouldn't sacrifice your reputation for us. My reputation, Marcus replied, is built on making good investments, and you two are the best investment I've ever made. The words were out before he could stop them, carrying more truth than any business plan he had ever written. Rosa stared at him with something approaching wonder, while Sophia looked confused, but pleased by the idea that she and her mother were valuable to this powerful man who had changed their lives. Their moment was interrupted by the harsh buzz of the security intercom. Detective Morrison stood at the gate, his weathered face grim, with news that Marcus knew would be devastating. Miguel Hernandez cut off his ankle monitor 3 hours ago, Morrison said without preamble once Marcus let him inside. He's in the wind, and we have reason to believe he's headed this way. The bottom dropped out of Marcus's world. All their careful planning, all the security measures and legal protections had just become meaningless in the face of a desperate man's determination to reclaim what he considered his property. How long do we have? Marcus asked, his mind already racing through evacuation plans. Unknown. Could be hours, could be minutes. He knows this address, he knows their routines, and he's had weeks to plan his approach. Morrison's expression was grave. "Mr. Wellington, I need to be clear about something. If Hernandez gets inside this house, people are going to die. He's not coming to negotiate or apologize. He's coming to kill." Rosa's sharp intake of breath cut through the room like a blade. Sophia, sensing the adult fear, even if she didn't understand its source, moved closer to her mother and began to cry. Quiet tears that spoke of too much experience with adult terrors. "What are our options?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Immediate evacuation. Federal safe house until he's recaptured. And this time, it has to be permanent relocation when it's over. New identities, new city, complete break from their previous lives." Morrison paused, his cop-trained eyes studying Marcus's face. "Including breaking contact with you." The finality of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. He would lose Rosa and Sophia, not to Miguel's violence, but to the very measures designed to keep them safe. They would disappear into the federal witness protection system, becoming new people with new names in some distant city where they could start over without the shadow of their past or the complication of their present. "How long to arrange the evacuation?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Transport is already en route. They need to be gone in 30 minutes. 30 minutes to say goodbye to the life they had built together. 30 minutes to pack the remnants of a family that had never had time to become official. 30 minutes to pretend that love was enough when safety required sacrifice. Rosa," Marcus said quietly, "you need to get Sophia ready. Take whatever you can carry, but don't worry about belongings. I'll make sure you have everything you need wherever you're going." Rosa nodded, her face pale but determined. She had survived leaving Miguel, had rebuilt her life from nothing once before. She would find the strength to do it again, even if it meant leaving behind the first man who had ever made her feel truly safe. As she took Sophia upstairs to pack, Marcus found himself alone with Detective Morrison, staring out at the news vans that had no idea they were about to witness the end of everything that mattered to him. "For what it's worth," Morrison said quietly, "you did the right thing. Giving them a chance at normal life, even if it was temporary. That little girl had 5 weeks of being a regular kid, and her mother had 5 weeks of not being afraid. That's worth something." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Through the ceiling, he could hear Rosa's gentle voice explaining to Sophia that they were going on another adventure. That sometimes people had to move quickly to stay safe. That Mr. Wellington would understand why they couldn't say a proper goodbye. In 30 minutes, his mansion would return to its previous state of elegant emptiness. His life would resume its carefully controlled trajectory of business meetings and acquisition deals. And somewhere in America, a woman and her daughter would begin new lives with new names, carrying the memory of 5 weeks when they had been part of something that felt like family. The only question was whether Marcus would survive the silence they left behind. 28 minutes after, Detective Morrison's deadline, everything Marcus thought he knew about his life crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. Rosa and Sophia stood in the foyer with their single suitcase and garbage bag of belongings, the same meager possessions they had carried when they first arrived. Sophia clutched her new art supplies and stuffed elephant, while Rosa held the laptop Marcus had given her, the tool that was supposed to help her build a different future. The federal marshals waited outside in an unmarked van, engines running, ready to spirit them away to a safe house where they would become Jane and Emily Thompson, a mother and daughter from Ohio with no connection to a Manhattan mansion or the man who had learned to love them both. "Mr. Wellington," Sophia said formally, as if they were strangers instead of the family they had become, "thank you for letting us stay in your house. It was the nicest place I ever lived." The past tense hit Marcus like a bullet. Sophia was already consigning their time together to memory, preparing herself for another upheaval in a young life that had seen too many endings. "Sophia," Marcus said, kneeling to her level one last time, I want you to remember something. You're going to have a wonderful life, full of art and laughter and people who love you. And no matter where you go or what name you use, you'll always be the little girl who taught me what home really means." Sophia nodded solemnly, then surprised him by stepping forward to wrap her arms around his neck. "I love you too, Uncle Marcus," she whispered in his ear, the title slipping out naturally despite their lack of blood relation. The word uncle stopped Rosa dead in her tracks. Marcus felt her sharp intake of breath, saw her face go pale as she stared at him with sudden, startling intensity. Something had shifted in her expression, not fear or sadness, but a kind of recognition that made no sense given their circumstances. "What did you just call him?" Rosa asked Sophia, her voice strangely tight. "Uncle Marcus," Sophia replied, confused by her mother's reaction. "Like how Mrs. Chen calls Mr. Chen her uncle, even though they're not really related. It means family you choose instead of family you're born with." But Rosa wasn't listening to her daughter's explanation. She was studying Marcus's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had been troubling her for weeks. Her hand went to her purse, fumbling for something with trembling fingers. "Your full name," Rosa said urgently. "What's your full name?" "Marcus James Wellington III, Marcus replied, confused by the strange turn the conversation had taken. "Why?" Rosa pulled out a worn manila envelope from her purse, the kind of official document holder that contained important papers. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing certificates and documents that looked decades old. Among them was a birth certificate that she handled with the reverence of someone touching a religious relic. "James," she whispered, reading from the faded document. "Marcus James Wellington, born October 15th, 1986, Detroit General Hospital." She looked up at Marcus, with tears streaming down her face. "I've been looking for you for 20 years. The words didn't compute at first. Marcus stared at the birth certificate Rosa held, noting the Detroit address that matched his childhood home, the date that was exactly 1 day before his own birthday. But the name on the certificate wasn't his. It read, Rosa Maria Wellington, with parents listed as Marcus Wellington Jr. and Elena Vasquez Wellington. "That's impossible," Marcus said, though his voice sounded strange and distant to his own ears. "My parents never had another child. I would have known if I had a sister." "Look at the date," Rosa said, thrusting the certificate toward him. "October 15th, 1987. You were born in 1986. I was born a year later." "Same father, different mothers." Her voice broke on the last words. "Papa had an affair with my mother when your parents were separated. When I was born, he gave me his name, but never acknowledged me publicly." Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed began falling into place. The construction jobs that kept his father away from home for weeks at a time. The hushed phone conversations his mother had cut short when he entered the room. The mysterious woman who had appeared at his father's funeral 17 years ago. A Latina woman with a young child who had stood at the back of the church and left before anyone could speak to her. "You were at the funeral," Marcus said, the memory surfacing like a photograph developing in a dark room. "You and a little girl. You stood by the back door." "Sophia's older sister Carmen," Rosa confirmed. "She died when Sophia was 2, cancer. We came to pay our respects to the man who gave me life, but never gave me a family." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I saw you that day in your expensive suit, surrounded by people offering condolences. You looked exactly like Papa did when he was young. I wanted to introduce myself, to tell you who I was, but you seemed so untouchable." The irony was devastating. Rosa had been cleaning his house for 6 months, had hidden in his bedroom with her daughter, had shared meals and stories and quiet moments of connection, never knowing they were siblings. Marcus thought of all the times he had felt an inexplicable familiarity with her, a sense of coming home that had nothing to do with romantic attraction and everything to do with blood calling to blood. "The DNA test," Detective Morrison said quietly from where he had been watching their reunion with growing amazement. When you file for permanent custody or adoption, they'll require genetic testing. That would have revealed the relationship eventually. Sophia looked between the adults with the confusion of a child trying to understand why everyone was crying when they should be celebrating. Does this mean we're really family now? Like for real family? Yes, Mika, Rosa said, pulling her daughter close while never taking her eyes off Marcus. It means Uncle Marcus really is your uncle. Marcus felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the world. For 38 years, he had believed himself alone, an only child who had built his empire through solitary determination. But Rosa had been out there all along, surviving poverty and violence with the same stubborn strength he recognized in himself. They shared more than just their father's DNA. They shared his resilience, his refusal to give up when life knocked them down. This changes everything, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. You can't disappear into witness protection. Family doesn't abandon family. Marcus, Detective Morrison interrupted, this is touching, but Miguel Hernandez is still out there with violent intentions. DNA doesn't stop bullets. Then we face him together, Marcus replied, with the cold determination that had built his fortune. As a family, Rosa shook her head frantically. No, you don't understand. Miguel isn't just dangerous, he's insane. When he's angry, he doesn't think about consequences or self-preservation. He would kill you without hesitation if he thought you were protecting us. And I would kill him without hesitation if he threatened my family, Marcus replied, meaning every word. Rosa, I spent 20 years not knowing I had a sister. I'm not losing you again because some wife-beating coward wants to play terrorist. The debate was interrupted by Marcus's security system chiming with an alert. On the monitors, they could see a figure moving through the shadows near the mansion's rear entrance. A figure who moved with the purpose of someone who knew exactly where he was going and what he planned to do when he got there. Miguel Hernandez had found them, and he was done waiting. Federal marshals are 30 seconds out, Detective Morrison said, speaking rapidly into his radio. But he's already on the property. Marcus looked at Rosa and Sophia, seeing his father's stubborn chin in Rosa's determined expression, and his own grey eyes in Sophia's frightened but brave face. They were family, real family, bound by blood and choice and the kind of love that doesn't break under pressure. Change of plans, Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had never lost a fight when it mattered. Nobody runs, nobody hides. We end this tonight. For the first time in weeks, Rosa smiled, a fierce, predatory expression that reminded Marcus exactly whose sister she was. The Wellingtons had never been the kind of people who backed down from bullies. And Miguel Hernandez was about to learn why their father had built an empire from nothing and passed that same unbreakable spirit to both his children. The showdown that would determine their family's future was about to begin, and Marcus finally understood why he had felt so at home with Rosa and Sophia from the very beginning. Love had brought them together, but blood would keep them together, no matter what it cost. Miguel Hernandez moved through the mansion's rear garden like a predator stalking prey, his movements sharp and erratic with the unpredictable energy of a man who had finally snapped. Through the security cameras, Marcus watched his sister's ex-husband circle the property with the methodical patience of someone who had spent weeks planning this moment. Miguel was tall and lean, with the wiry build of a man whose strength came from desperation rather than discipline. Even through the grainy night vision footage, Marcus could see the wild look in his eyes, the expression of someone who had crossed the line from anger into genuine madness. "He's got bolt cutters," Detective Morrison observed grimly, watching Miguel work on the rear gate's security chain, and what looks like a crowbar. This isn't a crime of passion. This is premeditated violence. Marcus felt Rosa's hand slip into his, her fingers trembling despite her earlier show of Wellington defiance. Sophia pressed against her mother's other side, clutching her stuffed elephant while watching the security monitors with the wide-eyed awareness of a child who understood that bad things were about to happen to people she loved. "The panic room," Marcus said, his mind shifting into the cold calculation that had served him through countless business crises. "Third floor behind the bookshelf in my study. Reinforced steel, independent communication system, enough supplies for 72 hours. "No," Rosa said firmly, her voice carrying an echo of their father's stubborn pride. "I'm done running from him. I'm done letting him control my life through fear." "Rosa, this isn't about pride," Detective Morrison interjected. "This is about survival. Miguel has already demonstrated he's willing to kill. The restraining order violation, showing up at Sophia's school with a weapon. He's not coming here to talk." Through the speakers connected to the mansion's exterior microphones, they could hear Miguel's voice as he finally breached the rear gate. He was talking to himself, a rambling monologue of grievances and justifications that chilled Marcus's blood. 3 years, Miguel muttered as he approached the back door. 3 years I gave that bitch, and this is how she repays me? Moving in with some rich pendejo, turning my daughter against me, making me look like a fool in front of the whole neighborhood. Sophia whimpered at hearing her father's voice, and Marcus felt a surge of protective fury that threatened to override his strategic thinking. This man had terrorized his family, because that's what they were now, family in every way that mattered, and filled an innocent child with fear that would take years to overcome. "He's not going to stop," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the finality of a man who had made an irreversible decision. "Even if we get him arrested tonight, even if he goes to prison, he'll never stop hunting you. Men like him don't give up until someone makes them." The sound of breaking glass echoed through the mansion as Miguel found a window that had been missed by the security system's coverage. Marcus cursed under his breath. In his arrogance, he had believed his wealth could create perfect safety, but no security system was foolproof against a man who had nothing left to lose. "Marcus," Detective Morrison said urgently, "the federal marshals are in position, but they can't move until he's actually inside and committing a felony. If you can get your family to the panic room—" "They're not going anywhere without me," Marcus interrupted, surprising himself with the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "And I'm not hiding from some domestic terrorist who thinks he owns my sister." Rosa looked at him with something approaching wonder. "Your sister," she repeated softly. "God, I never thought I'd hear someone call me that." "Get used to it," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "Wellingtons don't abandon each other, ever." The mansion's interior alarm system began chiming as motion sensors detected Miguel's movement through the first floor. On the security monitors, they could see him moving with purpose toward the main staircase, a crowbar in one hand and something that looked suspiciously like a knife in the other. "Basement exit," Marcus said decisively. "There's a tunnel that connects to the building next door, old Prohibition-era smuggling route that the previous owner had restored. We can get out, regroup, let the authorities handle this properly." But even as he spoke, Marcus knew they were out of time. Miguel's voice grew louder as he climbed the stairs, his rambling monologue becoming more agitated and violent with each step. "Rosa, I know you're here, puta. You and that little bastard are coming home with me tonight, one way or another." Sophia began crying, not the loud wails of a typical 8-year-old, but the quiet, terrified tears of a child who had learned that making noise during dangerous moments only made things worse. The sound broke something inside Marcus's chest, filling him with a cold, protective rage that made his vision sharpen and his muscles tense for violence. "Stay here," he told Rosa, moving toward his study's desk where he kept a loaded Glock 19 in a biometric safe. "If anything happens to me—" "Nothing is going to happen to you," Rosa said fiercely, following him across the room. "We do this together, or we don't do it at all." Marcus looked at his sister, really looked at her for the first time since learning the truth about their relationship. Rosa Hernandez was small and slender, barely reaching his shoulder in height, but her dark eyes burned with the same determination that had driven Marcus to build an empire from nothing. She was their father's daughter in every way that mattered, and like every Wellington before her, she would fight to the death to protect her child. "Can you shoot?" Marcus asked, pulling a second weapon from the safe. "Miguel tried to teach me," Rosa replied grimly, accepting the gun with steady hands. "He thought it would make me more dependent on him, more grateful for his protection. Joke's on him." The sound of Miguel's voice grew closer as he searched the second floor, calling out threats and endearments in the same breath. "Rosa, baby, I'm not mad anymore. I just want to talk, work things out like a family. You know I love you and Sophia more than anything." Detective Morrison spoke urgently into his radio, coordinating with the federal marshals who were now positioned around the mansion's perimeter. But Marcus knew that by the time law enforcement breached the building, it would be too late. Miguel was seconds away from finding them, and he had already demonstrated that he would rather kill Rosa than lose her to another man. "Mr. Wellington," Sophia whispered, tugging on his jacket with small, trembling hands. "I'm scared." Marcus knelt beside his niece, taking her small face in his hands and looking directly into her dark eyes, eyes that carried the same strength he saw in Rosa, the same stubborn courage that had defined their family for generations. "Sophia," Miley said quietly, "do you remember the story your mom told you about your grandfather? About how he came to America with nothing but the clothes on his back?" Sophia nodded, her tears still flowing, but her attention focused on his words. "He didn't speak English, didn't have any money, didn't know anyone in this country. But he had something more important than money. He had family to fight for. And that made him stronger than all the people who tried to keep him down. Like us?" Sophia asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Exactly like us," Marcus confirmed. "We're Wellingtons, Sophia, and Wellingtons don't give up when people we love are in danger." The door to Marcus's study exploded inward as Miguel finally found them, his crowbar having made short work of the expensive hardwood. He stood in the doorway like an avenging demon, his clothes torn from his break-in, his face twisted with 3 years of accumulated rage and humiliation. "There you are," Miguel said, his voice carrying a terrible mixture of relief and fury. "My beautiful wife and my precious daughter hiding with their new sugar daddy." Marcus stepped in front of Rosa and Sophia, the Glock steady in his hands, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Miguel Hernandez, you're trespassing on private property. Leave now, and we might be able to work this out without anyone getting hurt." Miguel's laugh was harsh and bitter. Work it out? Rich boy, you think you can just steal my family and then negotiate with me like some business deal?" He raised the knife, its blade catching the light from the desk lamp. "The only thing we're working out tonight is how many pieces I cut you into before I take my girls home." "They're not your girls," Marcus replied, his voice deadly calm. "They never were. Rosa is my sister and Sophia is my niece. They're staying here, where they're safe and loved." The word sister stopped Miguel cold, confusion flickering across his face for just a moment before rage reasserted itself. "Sister, you're telling me you're related to this puta? And I'm telling you," Marcus said, taking a step forward, "that you've just threatened my family. And that was the last mistake you're ever going to make." What happened next unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a Greek tragedy. Miguel lunged forward with the knife, his desperation making him faster than his wiry frame suggested. Marcus fired twice, center mass, the reports echoing through the study like thunder. Miguel's momentum carried him forward another step before he crumpled to the expensive Persian rug, his blood dark against the intricate patterns their grandmother had loved. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia's quiet crying, Rosa's sharp breathing, the distant sound of sirens approaching through the Manhattan night. It all seemed muted compared to the ringing in Marcus's ears from the gunshots. "Is he—" Rosa asked, though the answer was obvious from Miguel's motionless form. Yes, Marcus replied, lowering the gun with hands that remained perfectly steady. It's over. Detective Morrison was the first through the door, followed by federal marshals and NYPD officers who secured the scene with professional efficiency. By morning, the mansion would be swarming with crime scene investigators, district attorneys and reporters eager to turn a clear case of self-defense into a media sensation. But as Marcus knelt beside Sophia, pulling his niece into his arms while Rosa finally allowed herself to cry tears of relief rather than fear, he realized that none of that mattered. The threat that had shaped their lives for 3 years was gone. The man who had stolen Rosa's dreams and terrorized Sophia's childhood would never hurt them again. "Is it really over?" Sophia asked, her voice muffled against Marcus's shoulder. "It's really over," he confirmed, looking at Rosa over their daughter's head. "We're safe now, all of us." As dawn broke over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Marcus sat with his sister and niece in the kitchen, where they had shared so many breakfasts over the past 6 weeks. The news vans were gone, the reporters had moved on to other stories, and the mansion felt like home again, not because of its expensive furnishings or impressive architecture, but because it sheltered a family that had been forged in fire and emerged stronger than steel. The DNA test that Detective Morrison had mentioned would be a formality now. Marcus and Rosa both knew the truth in their bones, could see it in the stubborn set of Sophia's jaw and the way her laugh echoed through rooms that had been silent too long. They were family, real family, bound by blood and choice and the kind of love that survives anything the world throws at it. And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington III understood that he was exactly where he belonged. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, and if you watched all the way to here, comment, "I watched all the way through," and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's really exciting for those of you who are watching.